Hey, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today, I have with me Eliza VanCort, who is the author of a new book coming out in May. It is called, Eliza, tell us what it's called. Women's Guide to Claiming Space. That's what it is. Stand tall, raise your voice, be heard. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine.
I was
That's
like,
fine.
no, I know what it is. Eliza is an in-demand consultant, speaker, and writer in communications, career, and workplace issues, and women's empowerment. The founder of the Actors Workshop of Ithaca, she is also a Cookhouse Fellow at Cornell University, an advisory board member of the Performing Arts for Social Change, a diversity crew partner, and a member of Govern for America's League of Innovators. Her first book, A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space, is published in May. So, Eliza, welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. So glad to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited because I've gotten a chance to look at the book, but as we've talked about, we're not going to get too in depth or granular with the book. But we're going to be able to talk about a lot of the things, the themes, and talk about you and how you kind of got to this place where you are writing and sharing this particular message. So, Eliza, can you start with why did you decide to write this book? How did it come about?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a long story. But I will try to give you the abbreviated version. I had a pretty traumatic childhood, and I really decided I needed to be invisible to be safe. And so I grew up trying to crawl my way out of that headspace. And eventually I thought I was close. And then I got hit by a car. Sounds unrelated. But after my car accident, I couldn't remember anything and I was really struggling. But then eventually I started to feel like, oh, I think I'm better. Besides the fact that, I like raw tomatoes, crave them now, and I hated them before. I think I'm doing pretty well. There were weird things, but I was doing well.
Wow.
And then one of my friends came over and I said, the only really weird thing is that everybody's acting so strangely. And she said, Eliza, they're not. You are. You are really compromised with your communication. And my world really came crashing down around me because I was a really good communicator prior. And now not only was I not a good communicator, but I was so impaired that I didn't even know I wasn't communicating well. So I had to build my communication back brick by brick by brick. And in that process, I sort of discovered the HTML of communication, but I also started watching people and thinking, why is this woman doing so well? Everybody's really listening to her. She's, was it claiming space or space? What kept coming in my head, but I didn't exactly know the word for it. And why is this woman just really seeming like she's just not in her power? And I broke it down into 5 rubrics and started to think, what if I could share this with people? So that was the kickoff of my speaking career. And then, this is where it gets pretty funny, but most women will relate, I think. After my talks, women would follow me to the bathroom. And we all know what the women's bathroom is like. Like, we'd have conversations in that bathroom we would not have anywhere else. And they would say, I didn't want to ask this in Q&A, but. And I realized a lot of these questions were the same. They were the same questions. And I thought, well, what if I took these conversations in the bathroom and took them into the sunlight, so that we could all really see them and talk about them and lift the shame around some of them. And so that was the beginning of thinking of how I could scale the book. So it was a really long journey. If many things hadn't happened in my life, I would have never written that book.
You've been a coach, or from what I understand, a coach or somebody that's helped other speakers and people to be able to really own that presence, not just I assume not just in the speaking realm, but in the boardroom or wherever they are. What are a couple of the things that you see most commonly when you were talking about, these common questions that people have? What are some of the most common things that you're hearing? Just even a couple of them.
Well, I mean, the first thing, which is always hilarious, is often if there's a department with one man and many women, almost invariably the man will stand up and say in Q&A, Well, I have to say, like, I want to know what I should do because I am interrupted all the time in these meetings and I just can't get a word in from these women. And usually it's the boss. And then I go in the bathroom and this woman kind of sidles up to me and starts washing her hands. And she's like, okay, remember that guy who asked that question? He dominates the meetings and we don't know what to do. And so I have to start talking to them about interruptions and mansplaining. So that's sort of the bread and butter stuff. But I also get questions about more difficult things like, what do I do about somebody who, I have a boss who just cuts me down, or I'm dealing with sexual harassment, or I'm having trouble figuring out how to cultivate allies. And, these lead to really deep, deep questions that can move into even, how do I deal with a toxic relationship? Because so much of who we are and how we are in space and in our worlds has to do with how we claim space and then therefore how people respond to us.
Yeah, we're really focused on influence here, and that claiming space thing is very interesting to me. I think that one of my particular issues is that when I was growing up, I was much more dramatic. I was much more engaging and alive, if you will. And honestly, I think it was probably after having kids and not being out there maybe so much, trying to find my identity. What am I really supposed to do? What do I really want to have a voice of influence for or with? Or I think all that confusion kind of, I'm sure compounding with a lot of other things, I think it kind of made me shrink a lot. I held back a lot. And then I went actually to the movie Frozen.
Oh, I love Frozen.
Do you love Frozen?
Love Frozen. I just saw the second one with my daughter and my niece, and oh my Lord, yes. Frozen.
Okay, good. I'm glad because then we can be friends. But I've so related to Elsa. And so once I saw her just be so free with her expression and how the snow could express herself in that outside world so freely, besides the fact that it was Idina Menzel singing, and I love singing as well. I know you and I both have that background with music.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think there was something about that made me be like, oh my gosh, I have been so like locked in. Talk to me about why it's so important for us to claim space. What is that? What is it that we're giving up?
Well, I mean, historically, women have been punished for claiming space, and it's been quite serious. And we still are punished to a certain extent, and women of color are punished more. So I have a chapter called Crazy Feminist Bitch in my book, and it's about the words that have been traditionally used to silence women. And those three words are umbrella words, and they're code for behaviors women aren't supposed to have. And if we do say those things, if we do certain behaviors, suddenly we're slapped with these labels, and it's meant to shut us up. And historically, when we've had these labels slapped on us, we've had women were burned at the stake as witches. They caught women together. Like, one of the things of Crazy Feminist Bitch is this connection with being a lesbian and how that's somehow bad. And historically, if you were caught, you could be beaten for that. I mean, and now, Black women, of course, if they're in a car and they are pulled over and they claim too much space, they run the risk of dying. So there's still a lot of there's a huge continuum, obviously, but I think that we have this historic and current memory of the blowback we get when we claim space. And so often, if we don't know how to do it in a way that's safe, we defer to being small, because we really get rewarded for being small. Because and the way I think of it is that dog in a dog park. I don't know if you've ever seen a dog in a dog park that submits to the other dog. As soon as that dog submits, the other dogs leave them alone, but now they have to follow. And I think we are rewarded for submitting. And I think that as women, it is hard not to do that at times, but it is absolutely necessary.
How much do you think that the desire for connection, relational, emotional connection, plays into our willingness to submit space?
Well, I mean, I think sometimes we're connecting to the wrong thing. So that's actually something that I talk about in the book. There are 5 rubrics, and if you want, I can go over them. But there are 5 rubrics that sort of make a really good space claimer. And one of them is women, the ability to connect. And I think that we want to connect with people who raise us up, who let us expand into our most powerful self. But often the people that we're trying to connect to are the very people who make us the smallest. Because I feel like on some level, in the back of our heads, we're like, wow, if I can get this person to like me, then I must be okay because they're the most critical person in my life, as opposed to, why would I go to the most critical person in my life and try to get them to like me and approve when I have all these cheerleaders who really see me for who I am? And, I talk, in the book, I talk about this concept of anti-mentors. And I think that if you feel like there's someone in your life who is trying to make you small and who rewards you for being small, if you say, wow, whenever I'm small, this person's really nice to me, that is a good indicator to get the hell out of that relationship, or to find a way, if they are a parent or an aunt or a boss, to neutralize the effect they're having on you.
Okay, so we were talking beforehand about Wonder Woman.
I love her.
Okay, first of all, what do you like what do you love about Wonder Woman?
Well, when I was little, right? I'm older. I grew up in the 80s, so I was a teenager in the 80s. So I remember when I was a little kid, every day at my school, the girls would try to get all their food scarfed down as fast as we could, because we would haul ass into the playground because we wanted to play superheroes. And there was only one character we could play. That was Wonder Woman. So if you didn't get out first, you couldn't be a superhero, which I think is actually the beginnings of that feeling of scarcity that women have, but that's a whole nother story, and competing against each other and all that stuff. But, for me, what I love about Wonder Woman is she really is there's 2 ideas of aggression and strength, right? There's just, I am strong and I am brave and I am, and Wonder Woman really comes from this place of her heart, and of doing good for the world. And she also doesn't pretend not to be afraid. And one of my favorite things that I tell young people is, they always say, well, I'm really afraid to try this. Or, I tell myself and some of my friends too, and I always say, bravery is not lack of fear. I don't think it's very brave of Superman, who's all powerful, to fly through the sky and not care, not be afraid. Of course, he's Superman, who cares, right? But if you have fear and you do something anyway,
yes,
to me, that is so brave. And Wonder Woman is a little bit more vulnerable. So she's powerful and she's a badass, but she's vulnerable. And, I love her. One of my students gave me a really cute gift that said, I'm not saying I'm Wonder Woman. I'm just saying they've never seen Wonder Woman and me in the same room. And I was like, oh, my fantasy is fulfilled. Because I love Wonder Woman.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay, so we were, one of the things we were talking about beforehand, then we were talking about the latest Wonder Woman movie and why that was bothered you. Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to share?
I should have worn all black today in mourning of that movie. I am in mourning. I am so sad. That crushed my soul. Granted, there are worse things going on in the world, but that was pretty heavy. I love the first movie. I loved the first movie. And I was so excited to see the second one. I love Gal Gadot. I love that she was actually in the Israeli army teaching people combat. She's just an amazing, powerful woman. And she's had quotes that say, of course I'm a feminist, because anyone who's not a feminist is a sexist. She's just so I was just like, yeah, gal. And then the storyline they gave her, I swear to God, they took a time capsule down to 1950s, because the storyline was like, Wonder Woman misses her boy so much that she decides to wish upon a star that he will come back. He comes back in another man's body, but that's fine. And she has to give up all her power to be with him, which she does. And she's like, I can't save the world because I must love you. And then she's getting weaker and weaker and the world is going to hell. And she's like, it doesn't matter. I have to be with my man. And then at the end, the man, I'm sorry, spoiler, turn it off if you're going to watch this horrible movie, spoiler. And at the end, the guy's like, Wonder Woman, you must save the world. And she's like, well, now that you told me, I'm gonna. And so she then decides to save the world. And all of her power is fueled by her sadness over her guy. And again, like, I'm a hopeless romantic. I love love. But Wonder Woman isn't about that. Wonder Woman is about being a superhero and saving the world. And, you know, if a man happens to be around, that's Gucci for her, you know, but she's not like, my whole goal in life is to have a boy. And if I don't, I'm terribly depressed. So I just was like, and then the other thing is, you know, we have that trope of women fighting women, right? And that has been a real way to keep women fighting. And if we fight each other, then how are we going to unite and raise each other up? And what do they have for the anti-hero? It's a woman who has been given power by a man who then turns into a cat-like creature and it basically has a cat fight with Wonder Woman at the end of the movie. And the only way she is redeemed is by giving up all her power. So literally, quite literally. So it's this messaging, not one I would want. I'm glad my daughter is older and quite fierce because I would not take my daughter to this movie.
Okay, so
shame on them.
I have a couple of questions about it though. I didn't hate the movie, so I don't mean to not agree with you, but yeah, I didn't hate the movie. Okay, so
okay.
But let me ask you this. Okay, so what is the difference in your mind between the way that Wonder Woman connects with the male character in the first movie versus the way she connects with him in the second movie? So the first movie you said you liked. Why is it okay for her to fall in love with him the way she did in the first movie versus how she responded in the second movie?
Well, in the first movie, she doesn't give up her power. In fact, what he likes about her is her powerful self. You know, and so many times in relationships, the trick for women who feel like they are in their power is finding a man who's like, wow, you're in your power. That's sexy and awesome and interesting. I want to be with you, right? And those men usually tend to be very confident and wonderful, you know, because they don't need to be around small people because they don't feel small. So they want someone to match them. In this movie, the whole movie was literally about her, and they almost made it seem noble to give up her power to keep her man around. And, you know, we don't want to send that message to our daughters that true love is giving up a piece of yourself and being small for another human, even if it means losing all your strength, quite literally. It's more important to have a man, unless, of course, the man tells you to take your power back, and then you should listen to him and take it. Yeah, I mean, and I love that first movie, and I love the love story in that first movie so much. I mean, I'm a sucker, but this was a weird.
So what I find a little interesting though is that she doesn't realize that she's giving up her power at first. When she's not necessarily making that choice to give up her power to get him back until later when she's like, oh my gosh, I still have you. I'm trying to, and that's a thing that I remember with like Spider-Man 2 back with Tobey Maguire. That was a deal that he was struggling with too, is this whole like connecting with people versus going out and being who I am, and how do I navigate whether or not I'm going to be. And so to me the struggle was real, so that desire to connect and to have that kind of a relationship, but then realizing that means I might have to give up something, and how am I gonna to deal with that? And so anyway, I guess that part of it I could relate to, at least.
Right. No, I get that, but it's kind of like once she figured it out, she needed him to tell her to take it back.
You're like,
she was like, I'm losing my power. I don't know what to do. And he's like, Wonder Woman, you need your power. I am telling you so. And she's like, well, now I'm curious. Maybe I should. You know, I mean, she lost all, like, what I think was so powerful about the first movie is that she had a point of view.
Okay.
And she wasn't shy about her point of view. And she didn't take her view from anyone. She listened to other people, but she did what was right and she had a point of view. In this movie, she had no center. You know, she really didn't. He was determining all of her choices, you know, and influencing. So, I mean, so many of her choices had to do with him, you know, and it was just really, it was just so disappointing. It's very sad with this movie. But, you know, I mean, the moment I loved in the first Wonder Woman that I thought was so beautiful. And what's interesting, I don't know if you heard the story, is the director was told by the producers they wanted to cut this scene. And she said, if you cut this scene, I'm walking. And it's the scene where she walks across the battlefield.
No way. That is the best scene of the whole movie.
They wanted to cut that scene.
I did not know that.
And yep. And she said, that is her becoming Wonder Woman, really. That is her saying, I don't care what anyone tells me. I don't care if all these men say it's not going to work. I don't, you know, to me, I'm going to go help these people. And it's also very children and family oriented, which I love. It's not about conquering. It's about helping other people. And she said, you know, I'm going to go do this. And she walks through there and she's willing to sacrifice. And you see her just literally coming into her power. And that's why we're all like, oh my God. I was in Brooklyn watching that. And I went to the bathroom, speaking of bathrooms, and there were women of all races and all ages in the bathroom. And we're all like, oh my God, girl, that was amazing. Like, you're all crying. And the guy I was with, who's a dear friend, was like, I didn't get it. And, you know, the producers apparently didn't get it either. And then she also did really cool things. Like, I guess they, you know, I don't know if there's that, you remember the moment where she kind of goes down on one knee and you see her fat jiggle on her thighs. They also wanted to take that out. Oh, wow. And she said, this is not about the male gaze. This woman is an actual woman. And I'm keeping that in because this is not for them.
Yeah.
And I, you know, so I loved all these very specific choices as a filmmaker that they made and with editing. And it just felt like in general, this was a sloppy trope about a woman who, you know, was told, but basically who gave up everything for her man and then decided not to because, you know, so yeah, I found it a little annoying if you haven't noticed.
That's totally fine. Okay. So, so back to the issue of women working together to help one another out. It's so easy to feel like it's all competitive. It's so easy to feel the scarcity. Right. And what are some things that women can do to kind of to see that it's not that there is abundance, that we don't have to compete with one another, that there is more to be had and that we can help one another. And then, I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Well, one of the things I write about in the book, and I know I've said that many times, but I've been talking about the book a lot, is this idea of the scarcity myth. And this idea, and we've really been trained, if you think of power as a triangle, on the top of that triangle, there's a little mini triangle. And in that mini triangle, that's where power lies. It's very small, and there are very few people in there. And historically, that has been white men, historically. Now, because of that, if you had one woman, let's say a blonde woman up there, one woman, and another woman starts to come in, usually it was because the other woman was leaving, because they had one tokenized person in each category. And that has trained us to have this feeling of scarcity, that if somebody comes in, somebody else has to leave. And so that means the up and comer goes after the person on top, and the person on top tries to push them down. And for me, really being aware of when I'm feeling competitive with someone, and that's why I'm having a visceral reaction to them, rather than there really is something going on that they're doing that I need to address, is key. Because sometimes people just do dumb stuff. Women do dumb stuff, men do dumb stuff. I do dumb stuff all the time. But sometimes, you know, we're doing something because we're having a trigger reaction and we're feeling insecure. And when that happens, I think the first step is to identify that and then really do the opposite orientation of what you think you should. And really lean into that person and say, how can I support this person? Because invariably, as soon as you shift that dynamic with my clients and with, you know, what from my own experience, it's like, oh, I have an ally, I have a friend. And suddenly everything gets infinitely better because instead of fighting against each other, you're supporting each other.
It's so important. Okay. I know one of the things that you talk about in the book is about some, well, not just in your book, you talk about it in your TED Talk. So
Mm-hmm.
in your TED Talk, you talk about these sort of defensive, I just did it. These
Mm-hmm.
defensive filler words that we use, like and sort of. Let me tell you how embarrassing it is to when I was watching your TED Talk, I kept thinking to myself, this is one of the reasons why I took back over my editing of the podcast. It allows me to see all of my words, and if I wanted to, I could just erase them all right away. But I have realized that I can't do that all the time, and I'm just struck by how many filler words there really are.
Oh yeah.
So that first, I'll ask that first. So why do we do filler words?
Right. Well, I will say that I am, even though I understand this stuff, I am far from having mastered it. So I have been watching myself because I've been doing a lot of podcasts for the book, and I'm noticing I say, well, I think, which really isn't necessary because of course it's what I think, right? Why do I have to say that? And I also say, a lot. And that's an affirmation, right? Is it okay? Is it okay? So I'm seeing that with myself, and I'm trying to check myself when I do it. And of course, some filler words are going to happen, and you don't want to be so paralyzed that you're afraid to talk because you're thinking, what if I say oh no? But it is good to be mindful of it. The reason why women use so many filler words is because we tend to be statistically interrupted more than men. And so we adopt these compensatory strategies, these defensive speech patterns like but, in order to avert these interruptions. And it works. It actually works. But it's a really poor short-term, it's a good short-term plan, but it's a very bad long-term plan, because if you're constantly, feeling, you know what I mean? Like really, it just dilutes your message so much. And if we can start to work on silence and embracing silence and owning silence, then we will be able to not use those as much, because we don't need to sit there and go, okay, I'm afraid of silence, so I better put an here, because God forbid someone thinks I'm thinking or breathing. You know, you know what I'm saying? On the other hand, you don't need to be so proper that you're speaking the Queen's English, because to me, that's, if I'm always talking like this and I'm never saying, and I'm, it just becomes a little obnoxious. So
Inhuman.
there's a balance to be struck. And I want to stress that the reason why men interrupt is not because men are born interrupters. And I think that's really important to stress, particularly to the mamas out there, my fellow mamas and my fellow papas listening to this. Because the reason that little men interrupt is because they've done this really interesting research that when boys are little, boys are told to stop interrupting less than little girls. So what happens is boys don't have a sense that they shouldn't interrupt. So they just interrupt. And girls are taught to stop talking when someone's talking, because everything is seen as an interruption. So boys they interrupt, and the girls get really quiet. And so we want to, as parents, make sure we are equal opportunity educators about this, and make sure our little boys are told don't interrupt at the same rate as our little girls, because that is how we're training our kids. And, if you grow up being taught one thing by your parents, what are you going to do? You're going to do what they taught you. And I look back, because I have two boys, a nephew, and a daughter, and I'm a parent to all of them, although my nephew came to our family a little later. And I remember so many times telling my daughter not to interrupt. Stop interrupting, don't interrupt, be polite. I know I didn't do it as much with my sons in hindsight. And it just kills me, because she does stop talking a little bit more. Luckily, she's really stepping into herself. But there was a time where she would shut up when boys start talking.
Interesting. I'm sorry. This is something that I do all the time. I say this all the time instead of excuse me. Like when I bump into somebody or whatever.
Yes.
The classic, I don't want to
Yes.
take up too much space move. And I have been trying to be more cognizant of it. It's really difficult, but I'm working on it. Why? I think one of the things with I'm sorry is that I grew up thinking that when you apologize for something, the other person should forgive you. Why do I need to be forgiven for accidentally bumping into somebody? Like, that doesn't require forgiveness, right? Why would I do this?
Well, it's funny. We don't even apologize when we bump into people. Sometimes we apologize when someone bumps into us. I know that I've done that. I'm walking down the street and somebody will whack into me and I go, sorry. And I think to myself, wait a minute, what the hell just happened? You bumped into me or she bumped into me, but it's very strange. We've just been taught over viscerally to apologize. And we've been taught to apologize for being alive, really. And on a very fundamental level, we have been taught to apologize for claiming space. And when we do, we often say, well, I'm going to claim some space, but I'm really sorry about it. I lately have been saying, instead of I'm sorry, so for example, if I'm late on an email, I won't say, hey, I'm so sorry for being late. I say, thanks so much for waiting. I really appreciate your patience as I got back to you, a day later than we thought. Or thanks so much. I really appreciate that you're open to X, instead of I'm really sorry that da da da. And it does change the way that people respond to you. I have a friend now who, when she has a lot of podcasts and she has a messy office, and sometimes she just does them in her messy office. And she starts every guest appearance with, I just want to say I appreciate so much you enjoying my messy office, or I appreciate you putting up with my messy office, instead of I'm embarrassed and I'm sorry about my office. She's just like, I'm owning my office, which I love.
You talk about in your book, you talk about not telling lies.
Yes.
What can you tell us about not telling lies?
Well, my acting school is based on a technique called the Meisner technique, the Stanford Meisner technique. And the Meisner technique is all about picking up on micro behaviors of other people, the minutia of human behavior, and then being aware of our own behavior and going back and forth in this very stylized improv where you're being very truthful with people, with batting around these truths back and forth. And the classes get so tight because everybody is going to this very deep place with each other. And I mean, we've had Meisner babies out of the class, lifetime friendships. It's absolutely beautiful. And for me, I think that the expectation, the platitudes that we are told to do every day, while they do have a place, contribute to a feeling of alienation, because we're really taught to lie all day long like sociopaths and just accept it. And if we don't lie like sociopaths, people say to us, what's wrong with you? You're nuts. So for example, if I say, hey, how you doing? And you say, oh, well, I'm doing fine. How are you? And your aunt just died. I'm supposed to say, oh, that's great. And then you say, great. But really, you're sad inside. Your aunt just died. So for me, it's better to say, well, I'm doing okay. Or I've had better days. Thanks for asking. We don't need to, everything doesn't need to be okay. And one of the things that's come out of this horrific tragedy, epic, historic tragedy that is this pandemic, is I think there is more of a tolerance for truth and for not being okay.
Yeah.
And we all weren't okay before this pandemic. Let's be clear. We all have our not okay days. I have them all the time, but we were expected to lie all the time and say, I'm fine, how are you? Or, my day's great, or whatever. And now we're allowed to say, it's a little hard, but I'm getting through. And I think it's just such a gift, actually, because I think it's the foundation of a more authentic society.
Yeah. Pain tends to do that. Pain, like the actual real, not just pain, but the way that we respond to the pain.
Yes.
Actually accepting that it's true, being able to be honest. Those are all really important. I think of
Absolutely.
it as you can be real without bearing all. I don't have to tell you all about my aunt dying, but I can say that I'm okay and not necessarily, and not lie.
I'm great.
And
I'm
not
fine.
lie. Yeah.
Right. And I think there's another layer to that, which is women are supposed to make men comfortable in conversation. That is sort of our job, right? Is to make men comfortable. And if you doubt that, watch an interaction between a man and a woman. And if there's a lull in the conversation, it is usually the woman who picks up the ball and starts throwing it back, because we're the caretaker. We're trained to be nurturers. And so we're always making sure everybody's okay in an interaction. Whereas men are a little more comfortable, and I think it's a good thing, letting other people be uncomfortable with their opinion. They're like, I'm going to say an opinion. If you're not cool with it, okay. And I think that's okay for us to disagree with each other and to say, hey, I don't agree with you, and that's okay. And this is my opinion. And so that also comes out in this feeling of making sure everybody's okay. And if you have to make everyone feel like they're okay, you can't always speak your truth, because sometimes what your truth is not something that makes people feel good. Right. Sometimes what your truth is makes people feel bad, and because they don't agree with it. Or maybe they've done something that makes you sad inside and you want to tell them, and that's uncomfortable for them. And that's, to me, we need to be okay being uncomfortable, and we need to be okay making others uncomfortable. And that is not to say to be cruel. I think being kind is paramount. Like, we must be kind to each other, but we can be kind and still hold on to our own core, our own center at the same time. I don't think one is exclusive to the other.
I think that when I realized that pain wasn't going to kill me, and that actually I could learn from pain, it helped me to be less worried about other people experiencing pain, because I had this other belief that maybe they'll learn or grow from it or something. The reason why I say that is I think that maybe it's just because I'm a woman, but I think that there are people who tend to feel other people's feelings more often than others. Those of us who feel other people's feelings, I think, are trying to make other people feel comfortable, perhaps partly for what you were talking about, just because we feel like we need to, but also because we don't want ourselves to feel uncomfortable because somebody else is uncomfortable, because we're like mirroring their emotions.
Right.
So for me, I had to kind of get to that point where I was like, well, you know what, though? It's okay if they feel uncomfortable. I can be uncomfortable too, that they're uncomfortable, because it serves a better purpose, I guess.
Right. I think that's right. And I also think it bleeds into every aspect of our lives. So I've had, in one of my relationships, I had somebody who I really cared about. He was a wonderful person. And one of the things we struggled with is that I would sometimes bite my tongue. And, my emotional kryptonite, which I talk about a lot in the book, Emotional Kryptonite, is I will often be absolutely in my power when it comes to the women in my life. And I'll be absolutely in my power when it comes to my male friends. But when it comes to a guy I like, sometimes not so much. So I'm working on that. And one of the things I do is I just sort of bite my tongue. And I'm really trying. I'm doing it less and less. But particularly years ago, I would just bite my tongue and not say anything, because I thought, well, is it really worth the conversation? But the problem is it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And eventually you get resentful and you start doing things that are kind of crappy because you have this built up resentment. They don't know why the heck you're doing that. And the next thing you know, you're fighting over, the toothbrush that was left in the wrong place, as opposed to what really matters. So for me, I've really come to the conclusion that in any relationship, it's better to have hard discussions early that aren't terribly hard than wait until everything has built up and you're just pissed.
So true.
Better to have those little discussions as you go.
Yeah, it blows up. Why do you suppose you were biting your tongue? Why with men that you're, interested in?
Right. Well, I think we get that message. There's a stage little girls go through in middle school. Before middle school, they are valued by what they do much more. They don't have boobs yet. The boys and girls look pretty much the same, and they can be good students and everybody thinks it's cool. Then they start going through puberty. And in that moment, the value shifts from what they do to what boys like them. They start getting their social capital from boys. And so the boys are still valued by what they do. And so the girls start to make themselves small so the boys will like them.
Yep.
And they start acting dumber in class. They start acting really clumsy. And if we have time, I'll tell you a pretty powerful story about that. But I for me, we really are trained that if we want boys, particularly the younger generation, if we want boys to like them, we can't outshine them, we can't question them. And I think that historic memory of our childhood is just reinforced and reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. I mean, there are still books out there that are like how to get a guy, and it's like do all kinds of terrible things for yourself and for him, as opposed to be you. So working against that training, I think, is hard, because having a truly equitable relationship in a situation where one person in the world has more power than you than the other, and you've been trained to cede your power anyway, is hard. So for me, it takes an incredible amount of mindfulness and a really awesome partner who also wants to participate in an equal relationship.
What was the story?
So the story, so my daughter and she lets me tell the story. So my daughter, before she was in middle school, was a badass. I mean, she was amazing. And then she hit middle school and she started to act dumb. She was a triathlete before. She started to like run into walls and say she was clumsy. I was like, what is going on here? And I talked to my best friend, Kim, one of my best friends, and she said, listen, and she explained to me everything I just explained to you. And she said, you got to talk to Ella. So I sat down my daughter and I said, listen, honey, and I gave her the whole breakdown I just said to you. And I said, so I think you're sort of giving up yourself to be liked by these boys. And she kind of went, Mom, that's not true, whatever. You're just always saying words. So then about 3 weeks later, she came home and she said, Mom, you were right. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I was walking down the hall and these two boys were behind me. And one of them said, I like a girl because she's smart, and started laughing. And then the other boy said, I like a girl because she has a great personality, and started laughing. And I said, it still makes me cry to think about the story. I said, well, how did that make you feel? And she said, it was mean. And I said, yeah, Ella, that's mean. And in that moment, it was like, she was like, nope, I'm not going to participate in this anymore. Forget this. And she is now one of the most powerful. She's like the UN ambassador to her college, and she's working on, immigrants' rights and helping women who've been sexually assaulted, who are looking for amnesty at the border. And she's just this fierce, incredible young woman. And me as her mom, she still had that moment of, oh my God, and it was hard. It was hard to watch, and I didn't even see it. My friend had to tell me because it was so gradual. And so I think for us, for our girls, making sure if we want to have these equitable, beautiful, loving relationships, if it is a straight relationship, we need to teach both parties to really how to be their full selves and make sure everybody is claiming the same amount of space,
Starting to wrap things up here. What is the vision you have for your book?
Well, the book is really important to me because if you want, I can tell you the five, since we're going toward the end, the five. Yeah. So there are 5 qualities I found that women who claim a lot of space have. And the first one is they're masterful communicators. They claim space with their body and their voice. The second one is they claim space in terms of who they bring into their space. So they're really good at bringing wonderful people in and also keeping people out of their space that they don't want in there. The third one is emotional kryptonite. They don't sabotage their selves. They're really careful not to cede space, and because of imposter syndrome or all those other things. The fourth is they are really careful to make sure that when they go into a space, they assess if they're safe or they're not. And if they're not, they know how to mitigate any of the aggressions they're dealing with, like microaggressions, mansplaining, sexual harassment. And the final thing is intersectionality, which means they make sure that the women in their space are not just women who look like them. They make sure that they are women who are different from them, whether it's age or race or gender, or if they're queer or whatever. They are women who will bring a different perspective to their lives, and they actively try to raise up other women, because sometimes in order to claim space, particularly if you're white and you're privileged, you need to cede some space if you have an unfair share. So for me, making sure that I wrote a book that was truly intersectional And thank you to Kimberly Crenshaw, who came up with that term and is so brilliant. But a truly intersectional feminist book where every woman can pick it up and say, I can learn real concrete steps from this book. That is my goal. And it wasn't easy to get it published because it is not a traditional book in terms of speaking to one demographic. But what I really wanted to do was show people, you know what, a book that speaks to everyone really can sell. And it's been good so far. We've had a lot of pre-sales, and pre-sales are how they determine whether the books are going into bookstores. So I'm really hoping, the bookstores will get the message that, this kind of book will sell. And my vision for it, of course, is I hope it helps a lot of people, not just helping themselves claim space, but helps more women claim space with their sisters. Those are sort of the two big things that I really hope happen.
I'm going to ask you what your advice is for somebody who wants to be a voice of influence. But before we do that, would you share with us how we can connect with you or find your book?
Absolutely. So, well, you can connect with me at elizavancourt.com. I always feel weird, like I'm elizavancourt.com, but you can connect with me at elizavancourt.com. There's no U in VanCort. Everybody puts a U in. There's no U, VanCort. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I actually really love getting feedback on LinkedIn and talking to people. It's fun and interesting. And sometimes people will ask hard questions, but they're always respectful. And I love meeting new people. You can also go to my personal Facebook page, which has become a bit of a town hall in some ways. And that's fine. But all of those things are ways in which you can connect with me. If you sign up for my listserv on my website, you'll get little tips. And I don't bomb people with stuff. Every other week I send out something that I hope has value. It really helps people. And then in terms of getting my book, the best way to do it right now is just to go on Amazon and buy it pre-sale. So, and you just put in my name and my book will pop right up.
All right. So claiming space. Eliza, what advice do you have for somebody who would really like to have a voice of influence?
Well, to me, there's one thing that's fundamental, and it seems simple, which is believe you have the right to claim space. Because so much of the time we're given the message that we don't have the right to claim space. And until you believe that, you can't use any of the tools in my book because you have to believe you have permission to do so. And so give yourself permission and believe that you have the right to claim space. Because after that, once you believe that, it's just implementing tools. But that is the hardest hurdle. And we're 50% of the population. So we should be claiming 50% of the space.
And your book offers both. It speaks to the heart and it speaks to the tools. It gives people what they need to be able to do it. So it's almost like a textbook, but with a little bit of that, that extra ability to tap into why we should do these things too and why we should think about it. Thank you so much for being with us on the Voice of Influence podcast, Eliza. I wish you much success with the book.
Thank you. I really love being here. And thanks for putting up with me in the beginning when I couldn't find my phone charger.
Of course. No worries.